2:07 a.m., Northern Arabian Sea, 190 nautical miles south of the Pakistani coastline. U.S. intelligence just detected Iranian missile activity in close proximity to a U.S. Navy patrol zone. Not a launch, not yet. Pre-launch activity, mobile launcher vehicles repositioning, fuel trucks moving, radar systems cycling through activation sequences on a timeline that intelligence assessments associated with imminent ballistic missile employment. The activity was 40 nautical miles from the boundary of the patrol zone, where the USS Harry S. Truman carrier strike group was operating. The Pentagon ordered immediate action. Welcome to Navy Strikeforce. Today, we're going inside the 156 minutes that followed that initial intelligence report. 156 minutes in which a complex picture of Iranian pre-launch activity, a multi-layered American response spanning aviation, electronic warfare, and surface repositioning, and a decision chain that reached from a destroyer's bridge to the National Military Command Center, produced one of the most compressed strategic decisions the Fifth Fleet had faced in years. This is what it looks like when the Pentagon orders immediate action in response to a missile threat that has not yet been fired, and why the response to a weapon that hasn't launched yet is in some ways harder than the response to one that has. To understand the specific nature of what U.S. intelligence was seeing at 2:07 a.m., you need to understand how Iranian missile pre-launch activity is detected and what it means when multiple indicators appear simultaneously. Ballistic missile operations, even with solid-fueled systems that eliminate the most visible pre-launch indicator of liquid fueling, generate observable signatures. Mobile launcher vehicles have to move from storage to firing positions. Radar systems that provide meteorological and targeting data have to be activated and calibrated. Coordination signals between launch sites and command elements generate electronic emissions that signals intelligence assets can detect and characterize. And the movement of support vehicles, communications trucks, power generators, security elements, creates a pattern of activity around a launch site that trained analysts can recognize, even when individual elements are ambiguous. At 2:07 a.m., U.S. intelligence assets were observing all of these indicators simultaneously at a location on the Iranian coast in the Northern Arabian Sea region. Not one indicator, not two. The full pre-launch signature compressed into a timeline consistent with a launch preparation that could culminate in a missile in the air within 45 to 90 minutes. The Truman Strike Group was operating 40 nautical miles from the boundary of the area from which a launch could place weapons on trajectories threatening the carrier and her escorts. 40 nautical miles. At the closing speed of a ballistic missile, that is a marginal buffer. Not zero. Not comfortable. The intelligence report reached Fifth Fleet at 2:09 a.m. It reached the Pentagon's National Military Command Center at 2:12 a.m. By 2:15 a.m., the duty officer in the NMCC had the senior watch officer reviewing the data alongside the Defense Intelligence Agency analyst on call. The assessment at 2:15 a.m. was characterized as high-confidence pre-launch indicators with an estimated 45 to 90-minute window to potential launch. The word potential was doing significant work in that sentence. Pre-launch signatures can reflect genuine launch preparation. They can also reflect deliberate deception, Iran generating observable pre-launch activity to force a U.S. response, measure the response timeline, and then stand down without ever launching. Both interpretations were consistent with the available evidence, and both required a response because the cost of treating a genuine launch preparation as deception is a carrier strike group hit by a ballistic missile with no warning. The Pentagon's immediate action order reached Fifth Fleet at 2:18 a.m., 11 minutes after the initial intelligence report. The order had 4 components. Component 1. The Truman Strike Group was to immediately reposition out of the assessed impact corridor for the observed launcher's estimated range and trajectory parameters. Not a full withdrawal from the operating area. A tactical repositioning that would change the strike group's position relative to the threat geometry while maintaining operational presence. Component 2. All Aegis-capable surface combatants in the strike group were to go to full air defense readiness. SM-3. Block 2A interceptors in launch-ready configuration. Aegis radar in full active track mode. Component 3. A global Hawk unmanned reconnaissance aircraft operating in the region was to be retasked immediately to provide continuous overhead surveillance of the launch site area, feeding real-time imagery to 5th Fleet and the NMCC. Component 4. 2 EA-18G Growler electronic attack aircraft were to be launched immediately to conduct electronic warfare operations against the missile guidance and communications infrastructure associated with the observed pre-launch activity. The Growler tasking was the most operationally complex element of the order. The EA-18G can conduct jamming against the radar systems used for ballistic missile targeting calibration, degrading the quality of the meteorological and targeting data. The launch crew needs to generate an accurate firing solution. A launch conducted with degraded targeting data may still produce a missile in the air, but the accuracy of that missile's impact point is significantly compromised. Against a carrier strike group that has repositioned out of the assessed impact corridor, a missile with a degraded targeting solution is less likely to find its target. The Growlers were airborne at 2:26 a.m., 8 minutes after the Pentagon order reached 5th Fleet. At 2:31 a.m., the Truman strike group began its repositioning maneuver. The carrier and her 3 escorting destroyers altered course southeast and increased speed, beginning a movement that would take the strike group 60 nautical miles from its previous position over the next 2 hours, repositioning it outside the assessed engagement envelope of the observed launch site while maintaining the ability to return to its patrol area rapidly if the threat resolved. The repositioning was observable to Iranian surveillance assets. A carrier strike group moving at increased speed on a departure heading from a threat area is a visible signal. Iran would know the repositioning had occurred. Whether that knowledge would influence Iranian decision-making, whether observing the U.S. response to their pre-launch activity would cause them to accelerate, delay, or abandon a potential launch, was the question that the intelligence community was actively assessing in real time. At 2:44 a.m., the Global Hawk reached its surveillance orbit above the launch site area and began transmitting imagery. The picture it provided changed the assessment. The launcher vehicles that had been observed repositioning at 2:07 a.m. were now stationary. The fuel trucks that had been moving were parked. The radar systems that had been cycling through activation sequences had gone dark. The support vehicles that had generated the pre-launch signature activity were dispersed from their concentrated positions around the launch site. The pre-launch signature was dissolving, not because a launch had occurred. There had been no launch, no missile detected by any sensor in the region. The activity was simply stopping. The intelligence community's revised assessment at 2:47 a.m. offered 3 possible explanations. Explanation 1. The pre-launch activity had been genuine, and Iran had observed the U.S. response. The strike group repositioning, the Growler launch, the increased radar activity, and had decided to stand down rather than proceed with a launch that would now face degraded targeting data and a target that had moved. Explanation 2. The pre-launch activity had been deliberate deception from the beginning. A carefully choreographed display of launch preparation indicators designed to generate exactly the U.S. response that had been observed, for the purpose of measuring that response's speed, composition, and effect on U.S. operational positioning. Explanation 3. The pre-launch activity had been genuine preparation for a launch that had been delayed by a technical or operational issue, and the stand-down was temporary, with the launch preparation potentially resuming after a period of apparent inactivity. All 3 explanations were plausible. None could be definitively confirmed or excluded with available intelligence. The decision about how to respond to this ambiguity had to be made without knowing which explanation was correct. This is the hardest problem in military threat assessment, not the problem of responding to a confirmed attack. The problem of responding to an activity that could be an attack preparation, a deception, or a technical pause. and where each of 3 possible responses optimized for a different explanation. Now, consider the position of the Truman Strike Group's commanding admiral at 2:52 a.m., with the pre-launch signature dissolved, the Growlers still on station, and the strike group in the middle of a repositioning maneuver that had been ordered on the basis of a threat picture that now looked different. 3 options were genuinely available. Option A, continue the repositioning. Complete the movement to 60 nautical miles southeast. Maintain the Growler station. Except that if the pre-launch activity was deception, the US had just provided a complete picture of how the carrier strike group maneuvers in response to Iranian missile pre-launch indicators. Option B, halt the repositioning immediately and return to the original patrol area. Signal that the US was not going to allow Iranian deception operations to reposition a carrier strike group. Accept the risk that if the pre-launch activity had been genuine and resumes, the carrier returns to the threat envelope. Option C, complete the repositioning, but maintain the Growler station and increase maritime patrol aircraft coverage of the launch site area, establishing continuous surveillance that would detect any resumed pre-launch activity with a shorter warning time than the original 2:07 a.m. detection. What would you order? Comment A, B, or C below. Because 5th Fleet and the Pentagon were already working the decision. The answer that came down at 3:04 a.m. was a variant of option C. Continue the repositioning at reduced speed, maintain Growler station, establish a continuous P8, a surveillance orbit over the launch site area, and generate a detailed timeline analysis of the pre-launch signature's onset and dissolution for intelligence exploitation. The timeline analysis was the key element. If the pre-launch activity had been deception, its choreography would show characteristics of deliberate staging. Activities begun and stopped in sequences that maximized observable signatures without producing the logistical momentum of genuine launch preparation. If it had been genuine preparation interrupted by a technical or command decision, the timeline would show different characteristics. Activities that had been proceeding on a genuine operational schedule before something caused a stand down. The intelligence analysts had the Global Hawk imagery and the signals intelligence timeline from 2:07 a.m. to 2:47 a.m. They had 40 minutes of continuous observation of a pre-launch signature from onset to dissolution. The analysis took 67 minutes. The conclusion, delivered to the NMCC at 4:11 a.m., was assessed as moderate confidence deception, with elements suggesting genuine preparation that had been aborted. Not a clean answer, not a definitive conclusion. A compound assessment that meant both possibilities were still operationally valid. The Truman Strike Group completed its repositioning at 4:31 a.m., reaching a position 58 nautical miles southeast of its original patrol area. The Growlers returned to the carrier at 4:44 a.m. after 2 hours and 18 minutes on station, during which time the EA-18G crews had characterized multiple Iranian radar and communications emissions in the launch site area, building an electronic intelligence picture of the site's operational signature that would be used in future threat assessments. At 6 a.m., the strike group began a gradual return to its original patrol area on a route that avoided the assessed optimal impact corridor for the observed launch site. The launch site showed no renewed pre-launch activity. The post-incident assessment's primary operational finding was about detection lead time. The pre-launch signature had been detected 45 minutes before the earliest estimated launch window. That 45-minute lead time had enabled the strike group repositioning, the Growler deployment, and the surveillance orbit establishment, all of which were completed before the earliest possible launch window had opened. But the assessment also noted that the 45-minute lead time was not a guaranteed feature of the detection system. It reflected a specific set of observable activities at a specific site on a night when atmospheric conditions were favorable for signals intelligence collection and when the Global Hawk happened to be within retasking range. On a different night, with different atmospheric conditions, with a launch site using better emissions discipline, the detection lead time could be shorter, much shorter. The second finding addressed the repositioning decision itself. The strike group had moved 58 nautical miles in response to pre-launch indicators that had not resulted in a launch. That repositioning had been the correct tactical response, given the available intelligence at the time. But it had also provided Iran with a complete behavioral picture of how a U.S. carrier strike group responds to missile pre-launch indicators. The speed of the repositioning, the direction of movement, the distance achieved before the threat picture changed, the composition of the electronic warfare response. If the pre-launch activity had been deliberate deception, even partially, it had produced exactly that behavioral picture at the cost of some vehicle movement and radar emissions. In the weeks following the incident, Fifth Fleet reviewed repositioning protocols for carrier strike groups responding to missile pre-launch indicators, with a focus on varying the repositioning geometry to prevent Iran from building a predictive model of strike group movement patterns under threat conditions. The review also addressed the intelligence exploitation of pre-launch signatures, developing improved analytical frameworks for distinguishing genuine launch preparation from deliberate deception based on the temporal and logistical characteristics of the observed activities. Both pieces of work were valuable. Both were produced in response to an incident that had already happened. The Truman strike group resumed full patrol operations at 7:15 a.m. The Iranian launch site remained quiet. Whether it had ever been a genuine threat, or whether it had always been a 156-minute exercise in measuring American reactions, was a question that the intelligence assessment had not been able to definitively answer. That uncertainty was, in its own way, the most dangerous thing about the whole incident. Stay sharp, stay informed. This is Navy Strikeforce. We'll see you in the next one.